Hello everybody and welcome to a brand new KeySmash series. My name is Harrison, but I go by Dandy, and we here at KeySmash are excited to bring you into a project that we have been planning for quite some time, and we're calling it a crappy space RPG. That title is pending, of course, and is bound to change if we finish the game and it isn't, that. Our goal here is slightly different from our tutorials with this video series. We'd like to peel back the curtains and show how games are made from start to end. We'll be documenting what we do from the very start until we fully release the game. This includes every bit of design and coding. It's not going to be a tutorial, but it will show everything that we do. Once the game is functional, our playable sections will go into itch.io for free. That's right, we're doing this for free. 100% free, no gimmicks, nothing. We just want to share this with you, and we're excited for you to be a part of it. Each video is going to have a read-only link for our documentation in the description. Like we said, we want to show every single step of the process. That means putting all of our ideas out there where you can see them. Patreon will have our source code and our documentation templates should you desire to obtain those. Or you can just give us some support by saying that you like what we're doing right here on YouTube. Make sure you follow along and hit that subscribe button and the bell so you can keep up to date with all of these videos as we make them and follow the progress of this game as it's built. We'd just love to have you as part of the KeySmash family. So let's hop right into MDA Framework. And the first thing we're going to talk about with this is how games in general are made. Before we even choose an engine or decide on the art style, we set up a way to convey the vision that we have for our game. More often than not, this starts from simply a neat idea or something that inspires us. For example, we decided to make a game with a low gravity character controller. A lot of us have played games that have normal gravity, and a good number of games even have no gravity, but there are less games that exist in that medium between, and that's where our game's gravity lies, right between the two. With that in mind, we began establishing a few rules based on that idea. When we make these rules in a game, we often follow a process called the MDA Framework, which is really just a fancy way to talk about how we turn ideas into more fleshed out game concepts. From there, we start recording the ideas so that the team can easily interpret them later down the road. We do that by putting our ideas from the framework into a document called a game design document, or a GDD. Really, this is just a constant changing template that ensures everyone knows what is happening in a game. Whether you're coding, designing, building, modeling, or observing the game being made, the game design document works as a one-stop shop for seeing the skeleton of the game at a concept level and how it is changing and evolving with updates. Before we design levels or even talk about other amazing ideas we have for our game, we have to lay out what we want in the game and what we want it to be at its most basic level. And we're going to talk about some of these basic categories, and then we'll jump into them and talk about how we filled each of these categories. So let's start with mechanics. These are the behind-the-scenes rules, algorithms, and data structures that make up the game's core functionality. An example of this would be when you press the space key and your character jumps if they're positioned on the ground. From here, the game understands that it needs to play a certain animation. It also changes a boolean, or a true or false, to state that the character has left the ground, and proceeds to move the animator into a state which signifies that the player is no longer on the ground. These are representations of the code and game engine mechanisms behind the scenes. There are dozens upon dozens of mechanics in games, and often we aren't privy to each of them. We can understand some of the basic rules, but we often do not get to completely understand how the math in the code works or how different ratios in a game might be implemented. Commonly, all the player sees are the few forward-facing mechanics that shape the rules of how the game is played. Specifically, in our game, we have a list of mechanics that the player may perform based on the game state. You can find the full list in our documentation, which again is linked in its entirety in the description. Some examples of our upcoming mechanics will include a player controller, which we will talk about and show off in a few minutes, how the player moves within the world, collecting items, holding items, which has storage in the game and personal and base storage as underscores, and edge guard, how to limit a player's movement naturally within a level, instead of just having a massive wall around your world. There are also many others, and again, you can check out the documentation, it is all there. We may go back and add things as we progress or change things as we continue making this game though, so be aware that if you look at it now, it might be different a few months down the road. Next up, we're going to talk about dynamics. Dynamics are the gameplay interactions based off of the mechanics like we just spoke of. Dynamics are built on top of the mechanics and act as rules that are hard-coded into the game to dictate how the game is played. For example, some games have a double jump. Having a double jump would affect and alter the way that a player could approach a jumping puzzle. By combining all of the tools created by the mechanics, we can create fun and exciting gameplay loops to engage players in our game. Put simply, this is the connection the player creates while playing. For example, when we hit space, my character jumps if I'm on the ground. It's simple, and we don't have to delve into any game states or engine mechanisms to explain that. We give a game input, it acts, and the player understands that pressing space completes that action while standing on something. That is how jump works. In our game, specifically, we want to hit a few dynamic points that we think will be fun for our players to experience. The first of which is exploration. We're going to have vistas or observation areas and spectacle areas. The goal of these are for a player to reach them within the level, and it provides them an overlook around the section of the level that they are currently within. The rules and mechanics are that you have to be in the specific area to start the cinematic overview or observation clip. Sometimes you have to solve a puzzle first. These mechanics create a mental challenge for the player, as well as creating a dynamic of exploration for the player to experience and hopefully enjoy. We want to be able to build within our game. Building a main base within a game, obviously, has code restrictions and engine restrictions, but the idea of creating something from objects you collect will create an experience of progression within the gameplay, and players enjoy that. The sense of going out and completing a task and building something from that task adds a lot to gameplay, and we hope that people will enjoy it as we flush it out. There are a lot more dynamics in our game, but this video would be like 4,000 hours long if we described them, obviously. So if you want to know about them, remember you can check all of our documentation below. Finally, we're going to have aesthetics. This is the part of the game experience that a player will experience first. It's also the most simplistic part of the framework. We want to provide players an enjoyable experience, but what part of a game promotes an emotional response within the player? The art style can give an emotional response, as well as the story. In some cases, even the general gameplay vibe can provide an emotional response. And this is a game about fantasy, expression, challenge, and discovery. So when we get close to a finished state, those are the emotions we'd like to convey within our game. Here's a look into how we might convey this. Firstly, we have the fantasy vibe. This should be fairly simple. The game is a make-believe and revolves around an unknown planet. Its fantasy setting allows most of the grunt work to be done in that area, but adding a few really cool mechanics and models will help sell this point further. However, the specifics of this work are still a ways down the road, so you'll have to wait for future videos to learn more about how we plan to use this fantasy element. The next up is expression. This is the most nuanced part of the list and arguably the hardest to convey. This game can be an expressive game in the sense that in the end, we want it to be a journey of self-discovery. Obviously, this is not the primary goal of our game, but anytime you make an open-ended game where the player has a ton of choices that can alter how quickly or slowly they progress, there is some level of self-discovery that takes place within that experience. How does the game reveal to the player what they think and feel about this genre of game, and what playstyles they follow are two questions that commonly find answers in open-ended games. Next up is challenge. Although the challenge category is often confused with difficulty, they are two separate beasts. We aren't talking about the game being difficult to play or complete. What this means to convey is that our game will offer skill-based challenges to its gameplay via the addition of things such as obstacle courses. Are they a challenge to most players? Oftentimes not. But having to think and being able to scale the difficulty of these sections creates a fun dynamic for the player to experience while playing our game. With the addition of an easy jumping challenge that is required to progress the main story, we add a potentially fun dynamic to the game's progression. We can also add a far more challenging one for a collectible, but the end result is the same. The player gets to experience a unique mental puzzle to work through and enjoy while playing. Oftentimes, these are enormously overlooked, but having a way to engage the player's brain is vitally important for both retaining and entertaining players. Finally, we're going to have discovery. We consider this one of the most important sections of the game, being primarily an exploration game, and we should be taking the player to unknown lands, allowing them to explore a style of place they've simply never experienced before. This can tie in really well to the fantasy elements, as the pair are complementary and will help each other succeed if we do this right. A good fantasy setting promotes the emotional response of fantasy and imagination, while also giving a solid push and invoking a response of discovery as you wander around and explore the beauties of a mysterious new world. A game with collection opportunities should evoke this feeling as strongly as can be implemented, so our goal with this game is to promote this emotional response and foster the explorative feelings in a way that we can make it feel natural. In conclusion, while long and occasionally tedious, exploring the MDA, which, I will remark, stands for Mechanics, Dynamics, and Aesthetics, which we just went over, the MDA framework can really help you flesh out a game idea and push it to the next step of planning. But with that out of the way, we are excited to show you some of the progress we've currently made up to this point on a crappy space RPG. The first thing that we're going to show off here is the character controller. First and foremost, we picked out a free character that fit the theme of our game that we enjoyed, and we feel like we struck gold as the character has most of the animations that we were looking for. With this character, our lead programmer, Imster, went into work creating the code that controls how the character moves around within our world, and as you can see, the character is moving properly. Imster has actually gone ahead and put all of the animations that we currently have into our code as well, being as her constant state of being is ahead of the curve. So she's knocked that out already, and it's fantastic to have that much work done. The astronaut, who is starring as our game's main character, can currently walk, run, jump, glide, flip, and perform all other basic animations that we need and we feel are necessary for explorative movement. This is actually a decent chunk of coding, but if you need to see it, you can find a full set of our source code on our Patreon. Here, you can see the animation states changing as the character moves around. Each animation transitions as different inputs are provided. Sometimes, similar inputs are allowed based on the state of the game. For example, if the space key is triggered during a jump, then you're going to glide instead of jump. This depends on whether you are on the ground or in the air. The next thing we want to talk about with this devlog are the art assets and the art style. First and foremost, we will keep an up-to-date document with every art asset that we don't personally make ourselves and have links to where we obtained those assets. You can find a read-only document in the description below that houses all of that information so that y'all know each of the imported assets that we're using that we didn't create. Obviously, this ties pretty closely with the art style, and if you hadn't guessed already, that art style is going to be largely in the low poly area. Now, any asset that we cannot find online, we will create ourselves with the decimation technique, which you can see being played on the screen now. This is just a really simple process to get the unique stylized low poly effect on 3D models that we create. The real challenge here is going to be getting all of the asset packs we're using to coherently mesh together, as they were created with different techniques and a lot of times by different artists. So making everything look like it belongs in the same game will take a lot of work. There are more elements of art style, but we're going to be saving those for later devlogs because we just don't have any good UI or 2D elements to talk about ready yet, but you will see those in later devlogs. Finally, we're going to talk about some of the level design in our games. With level design, there are usually 2 or 3 phases of design that need to be implemented. The first and foremost of those, after using the MDA framework to fill out your game design document, which again, we have for free below if you want to read through the whole thing, is to set up a rough version or outline of the level in something like Photoshop. In truth, the first design can be pencil and paper if that's how you prefer to work. It can be any medium that allows you to mark down or create art, but we needed something that we could show on a video. As you can see, we're designing the levels without much detail. Vague boxes and shapes are going to dictate where 3D objects go into the level later on during the building phase. This will primarily serve as a reference, and what's great about it is as we start to flush out the level in a 3D space, we can alter and change this 2D reference to match what looks better in the 3D world, while still allowing us to easily overlook our entire world from one document. Often after this initial process is done, things like jumping puzzles and collectibles are added on top with clues on suggested placement and the progression of the jumping puzzles. Quests and story progression are added on top as well. The whole idea is to create a 2D sort of cheat sheet for whoever is building the level in 3D, which begins once we have the required 3D assets. Other things are, for instance, if there's a large rock formation or map that requires modeling, it's noted during this process so the modeler can create the base level to match the requested specifications. The modeler would also take the vague estimate and produce a base map to generate a height map for the level in Unity, Or if it's just a geographic object and not a map, they create a simple FBX with a 3D model for the level so it can be added later. You can see this process sped up now in the background. We here at KeySmash personally like to use Blender as it's a great free software and has a ton of community support and tutorials, but you can personally use whichever 3D modeling software you like. If you'd like to know more about this process, we do have 2 dedicated videos, which we will link below. Once the design process is done, often a sample level will be created to test out the sizing and pacing of the level. Most of these sample levels will be incomplete and they're only for gauging the 3D space of a level. Most of them lack the effects and atmospheric additions that would truly immerse a player into a game or a world. Often during this process, they do create some prefabs though of 3D objects that might be used later in final versions of the level. Either way, we talked about a whole lot today, and I want to thank you all so much for tuning in to this, our first ever devlog. We really did cover a ton, but there is so much more to cover. We honestly just scratched the surface, and we'd love for y'all to stick around and follow this process with us so that we can show you all of the cool things that are involved in game design. Now, the best way that you can keep up with us is by subscribing to our YouTube channel and joining the KeySmash family. Along with subscribing, we also have a Discord that we'll have linked below that you can join and directly talk to us, the KeySmash members, along with our community that we fostered over the past year and a half of our time on YouTube. There are some incredible people there, and a lot of people willing to help you learn how to be a better game designer, or just how to host servers properly so you and your friends can have fun. Either way, one last time, thank y'all so much for watching. We look forward to showing off more progress in our next development log, and it's been an exciting journey so far. We can't wait to do more. This is KeySmash Studios, my name is Dandy, and y'all have a smashing day. Bye everyone.